and so we'll just quickly move over to the next session. I should just say something. I'm getting a few questions down in the chat window, so we will be sharing the slides and audio afterwards, so don't worry if you have to pop out and pop back in again or if you miss anything. Okay, now quickly introducing, so Future Genetics Chief Executive Dr. Mohammed Kamran is going to explain why diversity in research matters. Over to you, Mohammed.
Thanks all for joining the webinar. So it's great to see that obviously we've got a full house, and it's a privilege to take part in this meeting. So I just want to make sure you can see my slides. I don't know whether you can. So here goes. Can you see the slides, anyone?
Yep, I can see them.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah. Okay, good. Right, so I've been asked to present on the title, Why Diversity in Research Matters. And so with that, it's obviously a short 15-minute presentation, so any questions afterwards would be great. So Future Genetics has one single primary focus, and that's to help reduce health inequality that exists between different ethnic groups within the UK. And with that, we'll just quickly move on to acknowledge a fact that's been in place for decades, where there remains significant health inequality between different ethnic groups, not just in the UK, but across the developed world. And that's been in place for decades, and nothing's really changed. And to demonstrate that, if you just look at the presentation, the publication there from 1990, and what that highlighted was that black patients had a 7-fold higher prevalence for severe hypertension compared to the Caucasian general population. And with that, what accompanies that is this continued underrepresentation of ethnic minority groups in clinical trials where there's a high disease prevalence for those ethnic minorities. And year on year, we see publications and articles saying that this isn't right. For example, the title there, Clinical Trials Have Far Too Little Racial and Ethnic Diversity. And last year in the Pharma Times, it was acknowledged that we really need to address this issue around underrepresentation of ethnic minorities in clinical trials. And indeed, the NHS England acknowledges as an issue. So with respect to ethnic minorities in the UK, if you look at the many of the major chronic illnesses in this country, ethnic minorities have a much more higher prevalence. So we've got type 2 diabetes as an example. So what we see in this diagram, in this graph here, is that Black Caribbean, Pakistani, Indian and Bangladeshi patients of that ethnic descent have around a 2-fold higher prevalence of type 2 diabetes compared to the general population. And this data is not new data. This trend, this pattern has been in place since the 1980s. But despite this, we still continue to see significant underrepresentation of ethnic minorities in type 2 diabetes trials. So when we see articles such as the one that was published in the Journal of Medical Ethics, and that was a prominent London hospital self-reporting their recruitment pattern. So if you look at the diagram on the left, the graph on the left, that's the hospital showing how many patients were hospitalized due to cancer, and then the graph on the right shows the percentage of patients that were included in a cancer research trial based on ethnicity. So if you were to overlay these two graphs, what you'd see is that they're very similar. So on the face of it, that actually may come across as equality, but in effect, it actually demonstrates inequality, because the percentages and the numbers of patients that are of the different ethnic minority groups is so low that there's no statistical power to demonstrate whether that drug is safe or effective for those ethnic minorities. So in addition to the large volume of data that's been published in the public domain, what we did for the 19 diseases that we work on was to review every single phase 3 drug registration clinical trial, i.e. trials that have been run by pharmaceutical companies in order to get a drug registered, and then to see how many patients from ethnic minority backgrounds were included in those. And if you look at this particular disease, you can see in essentially every single licensed drug in the UK, the representation of black people and South Asian people is woefully poor. And if you look at the pie chart at the bottom, what that's showing is, if you look at that data as a whole, black people represent 3% of the patient population, and South Asians 0%. The Asians are grouped as 7%, but that we don't know the basis of that, and I'll discuss more about the risk of generalized grouping ethnicities into a general ethnicity. So then, in essence, what this is really, I would suggest, is saying is that there's no statistically significant, well, the reality is there's no statistically significant evidence from clinical trials to support whether a drug is safe or effective in patients that are either underrepresented or excluded. So the patients that that are excluded are often those with comorbidities, and also the elderly, and that's a key point, because it's often the elderly that use most of these drugs. And also we already talked about underrepresented ethnic minorities in trials. So you might think that what's the big deal, because a human is a human is a human, but there is evidence to show that drugs behave differently in different ethnic groups. And I'm going to use an example from where I am, which is Birmingham, where a paper was published that showed that there was a very a hypertension drug that was shown to be very effective in clinical trials and also very safe, and that was obviously in a population that was predominantly Caucasian. So when that drug received its license and started to be prescribed widely to all patients with many patients with hypertension, that then led to that drug being ineffective at the licensed dose for black people. I think that clearly then started resulting in hospitalizations, and this is how it got picked up. So this really raises ethical questions about running drug studies where ethnic minorities are underrepresented. So NHS England, and like everybody, or many people would appreciate, I'm being presumptive here, is that this model of a one-size-fits-all, i.e., one drug will work for the masses, is simply flawed. And this is acknowledged by NHS England, and also there's data that supports these percentages in the public domain, that in the UK, 40 to 70% of drugs simply don't work. So then it kind of makes sense for NHS England to take this path around of personalised medicine, which was initiated clearly through the 100,000 Genomes Project. So that was completed in late 2018. There was a report that was published in June 2018, which looked at ethnic minority representation for that project. And what that data showed, so the blue bars here represent the representation of a particular ethnic group in the UK, and the orange bars represent the number of genome sequenced for that ethnic group for the 100,000 Genomes Project. And what we see is the vast majority of genomes, this is something that Lina was kind of mentioning around the importance of representation, are predominantly Caucasian. And so unlike the credit where it's due, and this is certainly worth acknowledging, unlike the commercial phase 3 drug registration clinical trials, Genomics England have done a great job in increasing the representation of ethnic minority group. Well, certainly for South Asians, so you can see that the UK representation is just below 4%, but they recruited to almost 7%. And especially if you look at Pakistani and Bangladeshi patients, from the representation in the UK is less than 2%, but the Genomes Project is 4%. So that's great, and them making efforts to address this. But the issue still remains that if you look at this data as a whole, we have that same problem where the numbers are so low that they don't add any meaningful statistical value around around biomarkers or anything else around personalized medicine. So I had a joint presentation where with Vivian Parry OB, who's the head of engagement at Genomics England, and we discussed and debated the importance of a representation. And we both agreed and on the same thing, that there needs to be better representation. But she made a very important point at that conference. So Genomics England is clearly there, and NHS England is clearly there to serve and help the range and diverse UK population. And they had invested huge amounts of resource, time, and money to increase numbers. But clearly they'd struggled, particularly for black people, where representation was less than 1%. So at that conference, I also gave another presentation that was really to mark the launch of our clinical research program with the launch of a clinical study called Empower One. So that's shown here. So that's obviously published on clinicaltrials.gov. So this is an ambitious project where we're looking to recruit 200,000 patients on a 1-to-1-to-1 ratio for white, black, and Asian. So walking away from that conference, I actually thought deeply around the fact that an organisation or organisations such as NHS England and Genomics England that clearly have integrity, have, despite their best efforts and resources, have struggled. Have we definitely explored everything that we could have done before we launched this trial? So what we decided to do as a leadership team was to postpone the launch of our Empower One trial by 6 months, and really invest those 6 months to for our clinical research lead, Cash Arthur, to approach multiple and diverse NHS patient participation groups, or PPGs, and also patients that were attending specialist clinics for 6 months. So those 6 months was really around as an investment to truly listen and learn, and then act on that feedback, and that for us truly was beneficial, and it was worth that 6 months delay, because the insights that we got, we think, helped us to stay on target for what we want to achieve. So it's just a couple of the things. So what we consistently were seeing, and this is particularly for ethnic minority patients from highly deprived areas where there was a low educational level, they wanted to engage with clinical researchers who shared the same ethnic background as them and also were fluent in their mother tongue. And then another point was around simplification. This was across the board, so across all socioeconomic levels and ethnicities. So that didn't play a part, but all patients really fed back to us that we needed to improve on our patient materials and our processes in order to be more engaging with patients, and we acted on the feedback that we've been given. Another thing that was really beneficial for us was to speak with experts, and in particular, as I spent time with the NIHR's Patient and Public Involvement, or PPI manager, who's based at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham, and we're based on that same site, so it was convenient for me to engage with her. But the insights that she gave me and our organisation were fantastic, and one of the best pieces of advice that she had given us was to have patient co-applicants in our entire research program, and we took that advice and then we developed it so to have a panel of patient co-applicants that were diverse in their in the ethnicity, in the sex balance, and also age. So we've filled 3 places in for co-applicants, and they also weren't just randomly picked. So let's have a white person, black person, and an Asian person. We wanted co-applicants that we felt that could make a difference. There's some comments there, but I won't have time to go through them. But if you have any questions, I can explain why they've been given these different names. But also another important thing was not to have co-applicants for the sake of it. So what we wanted to do was that if we wanted to bring them on, and we did clearly, let's have a framework where they can contribute and add value. So we've got 7 activities listed on the screen. So those activities range from them providing critique, feedback, and comments all the way to a patient co-applicant taking ownership and leadership of a project and running with it. So in terms of where we're at, so clearly with the current situation, we've had to stop our clinical research last week. But we're doing well. We feel that we've been hitting our goals around a near one-to-one representation for male and female. This was really reasons for that is again aligned with what Lillian was saying earlier on. That although if you look at many clinical studies, you see a more or less equal one-to-one ratio male-female, but there's never any investigation we found around sex differences and outcomes. But clearly we're going to be looking at that for our research. In terms of age distribution, I think we've done well. There's a typo on the screen to recruit patients between the age of 16 to 64, but you can clearly see we need to do much more to recruit patients over 65. In terms of our biggest fear was, are we going to struggle to recruit ethnic minorities? We haven't. We've literally recruited hundreds and hundreds of Black and Asian patients, and we've only been running since February for Empower One. So what is Empower One about? In essence, we're looking at the top 19 diseases that cause significant death and poor health in the UK, and by looking at those diseases, what we want to find out is the drugs that are prescribed to those patients. We want to break down and see which treatments are failing or working in different groups based on ethnicity and also age, and so we're segmenting cohorts to look at that. And once we find out which drugs are effective in population X versus Y, clearly we'll publish that. And the design is such that these are statistically powered, so that hopefully it will put clinicians and healthcare professionals on notice to prescribe appropriately, and also then hopefully put pressure on pharmaceutical companies to start recruiting more ethnic minorities. So in terms, this is this is a medium to long term goal. So best case scenario, we're looking at 2 to 5 years plus before we do something. And as a leadership team, we kind of challenged ourselves to say, if it's truly about the patient and we're truly about making a difference, can we, in the interim, can we make a difference in the short term? So we kind of explored, researched, and dug and discussed what we can do, and we discovered that health-related quality of life measures was a good way how we could potentially impact on improving patient outcomes in the short term as well. So we've got tens and tens of clinical outcome measures that we collect on the short term. So this is just one of them. So what this is showing is that, again, now this thing that people just assume for this clinical outcome, there's nothing between males and females. But we clearly saw a difference even with this data set, which we obviously we're looking to grow as time goes on. A statistically significant outcome that showed a poor outcome for female patients. And if you look at generalized ethnicity for that particular measure, Black patients had a statistically significant poorer outcome to the other two generalized ethnicities, White and Asian. So this was kind of mentioned earlier on, the risk of looking at generalized ethnicities. So when we looked at the individual specific ethnicities for Black, so we see Caribbean, African, and Black other, we saw that the Black Caribbean patients' clinical outcome was very poor at 56, score of 56. And that, in effect, was being masked by the Black African and Black other patients. So, because if you look at them, they're ranking close to White and Asian patients. So that's the risk of looking at generalized ethnicity. And to kind of put further emphasis on this point, if you look at the Asian group on the left of the graph, that had the best clinical score for clinical outcome. But if you then look at Asians or South Asians broken down in specific ethnicity, you can see Pakistani patients having poor outcomes. We also are looking at age, and although it's not shown for this clinical outcome, for many of the other clinical outcomes, we see a very poor, statistically significant, very poor outcome for patients over the age of 65. So what we do with this data is we give this back to the clinicians and the GPs on an individual patient level, so they can then carry out the interventions that they believe are appropriate. So we hopefully think we might make a difference in the short term as well. So in terms of key points, certainly for us, in order to deliver on EDI, we need to have a genuine commitment to the cause, and this has been a difficult journey, and it's made possible because of the people we have on board are truly committed to what we want to deliver on. The second thing is what we certainly learned was to truly listen and learn, and that's kind of the example that I gave. How I was worried, are we going to run into the same issues as Genomics England? So we just tried a different strategy, but obviously we'll see in the long term how things pan out. But certainly at the moment they're going well. But we continue to engage with stakeholders. I engage with the people that we want to help. So in terms of the third point was, once you have what you think is right, review it, consider it, and reconsider again, engaging with your stakeholders. And once you're up and running, certainly this is what we're doing, is tracking activities around what we had initially committed to, which is really to recruit on a 1-to-1-to-1 ratio. Certainly in the first instance, we are very mindful that we are recruiting large numbers of each of the three major ethnic groups, so we can deliver on our study. And none of these 4 points are possible unless there's perseverance and resilience, because there's been, over the years, there's been times where I thought I'll just give up, but you just push through and you push through, because there are challenges that you invariably I've hit and my colleagues have hit. So I just want to end the presentation by thanking you all for listening, and also to acknowledge the team, so the leadership team in Kash and Roxana, and our clinical researchers, Maria, Charlotte, Asad and Shrikar, and also our research scientists, Fabiana, Alice and Anna Maria. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mohammed. That was really fascinating. Specifically, I mean, what hit me was the slide on generalized versus specific ethnicity.
Yeah.
All right, so quickly before we move on to the next session, if anyone wants to raise their hand and ask a question, I'll then pick them out. And if you can't think of anything now, again, you can message Mohammed privately or talk to him in the lunch break.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm seeing one. Oh, I've just scrolled past it very fast. Did someone put their hand down again? I think, oh, there we go. So I'm going to Lynn Turner at Worldwide Cancer Research.
Hi, Lynn.
Hi everyone. This is quite new to me as well, so fine. I'm just interested why you didn't choose cancer as one of the diseases to look at.
So, with Genomics England are clearly focused on cancer and rare diseases. So we do collect data on cancer from primary care, and so if you look at, but it's not, it's one of our 19 measures, but it's generalized cancer. So the data that we collect, we'll just look at, but we're not specifically focusing on individual cancers because we don't know what we're going to find and how many patients we'll have in each cohort. But cancer is one of the 19 disease measures, although it's obviously very heterogeneous in itself.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
And quickly, we'll go to Sapna versus arthritis.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, Sapna.
Hello. Hi, Mohammed. I guess the question I had was, to what extent do you think the lack of diversity in leadership is promoting the struggle that some of the organisations you mentioned had in getting diversity in their projects?
Well, I don't know, because the leaders that I've met from other organisations, certainly I don't doubt their integrity and their efforts to make a difference. So I don't know. I don't think that in order to make a difference you have to share the same ethnicity of the people that you want to help. So I think obviously ethnicity, having diversity is important because, like, again, what Lillian had already touched on, different ideas and a diverse group of leaders leads to a good melting point around exchanging ideas. So maybe I should just talk about our own organisation. So one of our leaders is a woman. Well, there's two men, But we all think very differently. We have different perspectives on and positions very often. So it works for us. So I've deliberately had that set up where the other two, the two leaders. I mean, the Kasia and Roxy are running the show anyway. To be honest, when I tend to do presentations, but we all think very differently. So I think that the most important thing is that you're aligned on a goal, but you think differently. So, and I guess that's diversity, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess the slide that struck me was when you said actually some of the patient feedback was that they wanted to see people that looked like them on the team.
Yeah, so I mean, this is us. This is maybe due to the fact, one, it could be patient prejudice, or given that, and I'd attended a few of these meetings, I think it's those people that lack confidence and education, so they think that, and they struggle to speak English, so they just want to stay in their comfort zone, where if somebody looks like them and speaks their language, then it'll be easy for them to communicate. But what we resoundingly found was, regardless of ethnicity and age, and socioeconomic background, patients are willing to participate, especially when it's clear to them what they're signing up to. So I think that's where the responsibility of the researchers kick in, where you make it simple and clear on what you're trying to achieve.
Thank you, Mohammed. I'm going to have to jump in there. Thank you for those questions, and sorry for those that didn't get picked. Mohammed will be on the panel later, so there is a chance to ask him questions again or at lunchtime. So thank you again to both of our first two speakers of the day, talking about mapping out the landscape. Before we move on to our second session of the day, we're just going to do another quick poll. So this will come up on your screens at the moment, and then if you visit slide.do, oh no, here we go. This is a poll within Zoom software. So where would you say your organisation are on your EDI journey? Not really started, all the way up to doing everything you possibly can. Please answer now.